Shavua Tov, thank you for joining us. We're going to continue where we left off last week, but first, we're going to discuss a little bit of the issues that came up in this week's Torah reading, at least in the national 1 year cycle as opposed to the 3 year cycle. We read Parashat Teruma, and it's very appropriate right now. We have this commandment, as we saw earlier a few weeks ago, Asuli Mikdash V'Shachanti B'Chtocham, right over here. Maimonides brings the Midrash Chazal, Midrash Halacha, which says that even though here we have specific instructions to make the tent of meeting, the tabernacle that was built in the wilderness at Mount Sinai, there is a eternal commandment for the Jewish people to create a mikdash, which we translate as sanctuary. And mikdash could have many incarnations. It could be the tent of meeting, which is portable, deconstructible, temporary, or it could be the tabernacle at Shiloh, which was a semi-permanent structure, or it is the temple in Jerusalem, and various other incarnations. And this week we saw how we saw how what Dr. England spoke about early last week touched me about the meaning of plague and the connection to the temple. One of the lessons I took away from that was that things are going to happen. God has made his determination. There's a gzerah, so to speak. The only question is, how is it going to play out? Some people, for example, it has been determined that they are not to live out their year. Others have been inscribed in the book of life. The only question is, how is it going to play out for them? Their actions, their behavior can determine it. There's also the chance for repentance. Basically, mankind is going to use its resources. The Jewish people are going to use their resources. The question is, are they going to do it for the right reasons or not? I was deeply, deeply disappointed this last week to read the news that the Israeli government had allocated quite a few million shekels for the refurbishment or perhaps the improvement of the temple plaza and its complex. Sorry, not the temple, the Kotel Plaza and all the environs there. I think it's a terrible thing because people have created the Kotel as a replacement for what should be the temple. The Israeli government should be investing in the temple. But the problem is, as we saw in the last few months, the Israeli government is confusing, let's say, the telephone for its telephone cover. The Kotel is the outer retaining wall of the Temple Mount. It is not a replacement for our holy temple, but unfortunately in the minds, in the eyes of many, it has become that. And that's a woeful thing, that's the center of Judaism. That is our temple today. But I could forgive those politicians because they are ultimately just politicians. That's how they behave. That's how things are. They're not supposed to be scholars of Judaism. But the problem is, I also saw that there was a declaration from major rabbinical figures in America, and they were also decrying the situation, the political situation involving who gets to pray at the Kotel Plaza and the style of the prayers and all those other things. Now, don't get me wrong. I think that the Kotel is at the very least, a public synagogue, and therefore should be treated with the utmost respect of a synagogue. And I do not think it's proper that radical elements who definitely don't pray there on a regular basis and have no real connection to a proper synagogue should dictate to everybody what should go on there. Certainly not. I think the Rav has spoken out against this also. But the problem is they are jumping on this as though it is more than just a synagogue, as though, once again, it's a replacement for our holy temple, which it is not. But for them, unfortunately, that is the end-all and be-all, and that's a darn shame. Now, the Jewish people basically have an allocation. They have a budget given by God. The question is, when they have all these resources, they have, thank God, they have wealth, silver and gold, precious stones, and these precious materials. Are they going to use it to construct the temple? Are they going to use it to construct a cinematheque or a football stadium? We can make a massive stadium, like I just said. We could spend hundreds of millions of shekels, and that could be a gathering place for hundreds of thousands of people, if not at least tens of thousands of people. And that would be for what basically amounts to nonsense. Or we could invest in a temple as a place of pilgrimage and prayer. And basically, if you are not going to use your money and your resources for such a place, then you're going to waste it on other such things. If you're going to count people, you're going to put them at risk. You're going to have whatever. You're going to might suffer the consequences, or you can make sure that everybody contributes their money toward their sacrifices, and that will protect them because they're using it for the right purposes. And that's what we see here. We're supposed to use our resources for the right thing, because if we don't, they're going to end up being used toward that which is at the very best nonsense, at the very worst even perhaps idolatry even. So I certainly believe that the time has come. It's been more than time for the Jewish people to get together and begin to study these halachot and make it a practical goal that the temple be rebuilt, and that's what we should be demanding of those so-called elected leaders. Yes, we elect them, and we should have higher standards. We should only choose people who actually are thinking straight. But what are we going to do? We're in a situation where we're not doing that. So I only hope that through the study of these halachot, we will all come to a greater understanding and realize who is really on our side and who we can choose to lead us. So we have here the first commandment of the Mishkan. It was to collect materials and funds, and then for the purpose of building the Mikdash. The first implement that was to be built in the Mikdash was the Ark of the Covenant. As we saw, Rambam leaves that out entirely from the description of the temple. He doesn't have it as one of the vessels that is critical for a Mikdash. There was one in history. It's gone now. He doesn't seem to ever say that it's something that they really wanted to bring back. And I have not found, even though I've seen it in later sources, Aharonim, who have a romantic view, a non-rational view of how the temple is going to work, that the Ark of the Covenant will return. I see no reason why it will. I haven't seen any proof to it. And as I wrote before, I think even in Second Temple times, when they presumably had the chance to do so, they did not bring it back, and that it was the sage's decision that it remained that way. Over here, we have the commandment to make the Kapolrith. That's the lid of the Ark of the Covenant. And this further on, as you see this, describes how to make the kruvim of the covenant. And it says here, V'natatata kaporet al aron milmala, v'al aron titena hedut asher aten lecha. Here it says that God told Moses that he is to put the Kapolrith on top of the Aron, on top, it's right here. And then it says he is supposed to place into the Aron the Eduth that he will give him, or that God says, I will give you. And that's where God will, so to speak, meet with Moses. So we have here the placing of the Eduth, which is, what is the Eduth, by the way? The testimony. But what is the testimony? That's a good question. The problem is, earlier, we have it that there's another Eduth. Here, we see the construction of the Aron. It says, make the Aron of, basically, it's a chest made out of wood, covered inside and outside with gold. It has these rings at the edges in order to pass through these staves, which are basically also wood, made of acacia wood, also covered in gold. And those staves are supposed to be in there. And you are to place into the Aron, this ark, the Eduth that I will give you. This is verse 16, at least the way we number of chapters. So I understand Moses is to place the Eduth, which apparently, by the way, was Hilchot Eduth, the tablets, the ones he destroyed. The sages say those broken tablets were put into the ark, and eventually the second tablets, the ones that remained intact. So they are put into the ark. But then we get here once again to the second to last verse in this paragraph. This is the end of the paragraph over here. It says, put the Kapolrith on. Well, I understand why I'm putting the big golden lid on this thing, because the Eduth, the tablets are already inside. And then it says, and into the Aron, place the Eduth that I will give you. So it's a little bit of a redundancy, or perhaps out of order. Moses was to put into the tablets into there, and then cover it and close the ark. And then he's supposed to put the Eduth into the ark. But it's already closed, and the Eduth is already inside. So what's going on here? This is a proof to the position in Bava Bathra. There is an argument. There's an argument among the sages. What exactly was in the Ark of the Covenant? And there are those who say that the scroll of the Torah, which Moses wrote 39 years later, before his death, which he gave to the Levites, and he says, put this in next to the Eduth. It says, Mitzad Aron Brit Hashem Elokechem. And it should be therefore, once again, in Eduth. they say that was actually placed in the Ark of the Covenant. And this would be a proof to that position, because the original Eduth, the Luchot, were originally put into the Ark of the Covenant, and then the Kaphorith was put on top. But eventually, many years later, they reopened the Ark, and they placed even more testimony inside the Ark. So that would be a proof to this position. Last week, we spoke about the Parocheth. The Parocheth is the curtain that separates between the Kodesh and the Kodesh HaKodoshim. And you look over here, this is an amazing thing also that you could see. This is the commandment to build the boards of the ark, the boards of the tabernacle. Once again, they were covered in gold, made of wood covered in gold, so that people looking at the tabernacle from inside and outside would see that the tabernacle is entirely gold. At least that's the way it looked, with silver sockets. So it looked like basically golden walls with a base of silver. This is a commandment to create the Parocheth, made out of course, Techeleth Argaman, Tolashani, and Sheish Moshzar, which is similar to the priestly vestments, made out of 3 colors of wool, basically blue, purple, and red, royal purple, which is not necessarily Crayola purple, more like a burgundy or a Bordeaux. And over here, it says Sheish Moshzar, that means a fine type of linen. And the purpose of this Parocheth is to divide between the Kodesh and Kodesh Kodeshim. It says, when Atatat HaParocheth Tachat HaKrasim, put it under these hook-like structures that hold it, and then bring to within the Parocheth, because there's only one way through. The inner structure can only be accessed through this Parocheth, this curtain, which is basically dividing the structure. The west side is what we call the Kodesh Kodeshim. The east part, which has an entrance, is the Kodesh. The Parocheth will divide for you between the Kodesh, the outer room, and the Kodesh Kodeshim, the Sanctum Sanctorum. That is the purpose of a Parocheth. It defines the barrier between, or the line between the holy and the even more holy area. It says here, when Kaphorith al ha-ron haiduth b'kodesh HaKodeshim, you shall place the Kapolrith on the Ark of the Covenant within the Kodesh HaKodeshim. Now, this verse is slightly redundant. Why? Because it says that you're to put the Kapolrith on top of the Ark of the Covenant. We had already placed the Kapolrith on top of the Ark of the Covenant. And then it says within the Kodesh HaKodeshim, apparently meaning that in order to first cover the Ark of the Covenant should be brought in open, without its cover, into the Kodesh HaKodeshim. And only once placed there should it be covered, should the lid be placed on it. That's what it seems to be saying over here. What do we learn from this? In a moment. The next verse says that the table should be put on outside of the Parocheth, in the Kodesh. And the menorah should be opposite the Shulchan. Mishkan Teimana, which is on the south side, and the Shulchan should be on the north side. Could have just said put the Shulchan on the north side and the menorah on the south side, as we saw previously. But here it says put the Shulchan where? Opposite the menorah. Where's the menorah? The menorah is on the south, which means the Shulchan should be in the north. It's a very out of the way, or it's a convoluted way almost to say what we could have said in a more simple manner. And also, then it goes about talking about the screen that served as the entranceway into the Kodesh. What's missing from this entire paragraph is the altar of the incense, the golden altar, which we're only going to read about a few chapters later at the end of what's Tetzaveh. And it doesn't tell us where to put that altar. So this is these questions are begging for us to find a solution for them. The suggestion here is that placing the Kapolrith on the ark within the Kodesh HaKodeshim is actually a reference, once again, to this point that I stated earlier, that eventually there would have to be something added to the ark. For many years, the ark just contained the Luchot. Eventually, it would have to contain the scroll of the Torah. So that implies that the ark would have to be opened in the Kodesh HaKodeshim, and that would be placed inside of it. But more than that, this is a reference to the Keruvim. The Kapolrith is something that's technically different from the Aron Haiduth. The Aron Haiduth is the repository of the testimony, the scroll and the tablets. But the Kapolrith, as we saw Rambam says, is a representation of the Keruvim, which themselves symbolize certain ideals and certain concepts. And the Kapolrith, or at least something that serves as the Kapolrith, is a critical component of any sanctuary, which means that even if the Aron would be absent, there would have to be something like the Kaphorith, which once again is the golden kruvim. That's basically what it is, the base that holds the kruvim, which is why we saw that in the first temple, Solomon first built much larger kruvim out of wood, overlain with gold, as always. And those were in the Holy of Holies even before the Ark of the Covenant was brought in there at the dedication of the first temple. And they remained there even after the Ark of the Covenant was removed. In Second Temple times, once again, we saw they replaced these kruvim with wooden structures that were basically sticking out of the walls. The walls were overladen with wood, and they had, well, I don't think they were so large. Apparently, you can't make wood projecting from the walls that wide, or at least that far projecting from the walls. And they made forms of kruvim and overlaid those with gold, so that when someone would enter the Holy of Holies, he would see that there was these images of the kruvim in the Holy of Holies, and that's a critical component. As for the absence of the golden altar in the Kodesh over here, this harks back to something we saw last week, and that is the golden altar was connected, as Rabbi Makover writes this, the golden altar was connected to a service that was more appropriate for the Kodesh Kodeshim than for the Kodesh itself. The main service in the Kodesh was the showbread and the menorah. But it says afterwards, and we go to Parashat Tetzaveh, it says the location, very interesting, if we could jump down there. Well, thanks to Machon Mamre once again for allowing us this. We see something very interesting. Look at Tetzaveh over here. The golden altar is mentioned over here. Where do we place it? Put it before the parochet. Asher al Aron ha'idut, the parochet which is on the Ark of the Covenant. It doesn't say put in the Kodesh, don't put it between the menorah and the shulchan. It should be before the curtain, which is upon the Ark of the Covenant. The curtain is upon the Ark of the Covenant. What does that mean? That's a reference for the fact that the parochet, which defined, once again, the border between the Kodesh and Kodesh Kodeshim, was also used, as we see in Parashat Bamidbar, as the cover for the ark when the ark would be transported by the Levites. Lifnei Kaphorith asher al ha'idut, in front of the lid, which is on top of the testimony, asher yivoed lecha shama, where I will meet with you. So the location of this menorah, which by the way is even farther to the east, it is technically farther away from the parochet than the menorah and the shulchan, but its location is defined entirely by the parochet and the Kaphorith, the curtain and the lid. So the menorah is basically, not the menorah, this golden altar is to be placed in front of the parochet and next in front of this Aron HaIdut, and that's its location. It's supposed to be directly opposite. They said that the service on the altar, on this golden altar, is the incense, but its service itself is deeply connected to what goes on inside the Kodesh Kodeshim. It is the only form of service that eventually will penetrate the Kodesh Kodeshim. Why? Because once a year, it says here, Aaron is to atone on the horns of this altar from the blood of the Chatat HaKippurim, the sin offering of the Kippurim, two different animals, upon which the high priest recites his confession every Yom Kippur. That blood is brought into the Kodesh, and it's also sprinkled on, sorry about that, the blood is sprinkled on this altar and also on the Kapolrith and on the parochet. And that shows that this service actually is the only blood that is basically brought anywhere near the Kodesh Kodeshim. And then the Kohen Gadol, his main service on Yom Kippur, is when he actually takes that which is supposed to be offered on this golden altar, the incense, and brings it into the Holy of Holies and places it right there in the middle, as the sages said, between the staves of the ark, or at least where the ark used to be. Hold on one second. I think we're getting a question here. Hold on. Nope, this is not relevant to what we're doing. Okay, so if you have any relevant questions, we'll answer this question right now, because right now we're dealing with the golden menorah, with the golden altar. Sorry. So this golden altar is what connects the Kodesh to the Kodesh HaKodeshim. Its service basically eventually uh, enters the Kodesh HaKodeshim, and that's why its location is described not in terms of the Kodesh, but actually in terms of what is actually uh, in the Kodesh HaKodeshim. So that brings us to the different points that came up in this week's parasha. We'll now switch our visual aids around just for a second. And we'll see this. We'll see over here that there was, we have here the verses I just showed you about this Mizbach Kaphorith. And the verse says that, like we just said, there's one time a year, Achat Bashana, once a year, Aaron, or his heir, the person who stands in his place, which would be the high priest, is to perform an atonement ritual thereon. And I wrote here that it's Lav Dafka. Oh, sorry, it says Lo Dafka. We're going to edit that as we move along. It says there's actually two other forms of service. I guess if you could categorize that, I shouldn't actually put a number here because it depends on you how you break these apart that are performed on this altar. It says Lo Ta'alu Alav. Do not elevate on there any other type of sacrifice. It says over here. What is the exact one? I'm sorry, we're having a computer problem. It says that no other sacrifice should be brought onto this altar. You can't place an olah, a mincha, and no nesech. None of these things should be offered on them. Why is that? Well, a special commandment. But this fact is actually disputed by what we're going to see in Parashat Vayikra. It says, Dam par chatat shel kohen Mashiach. That's what we read about. There's a par chatat of a kohen Mashiach. When a kohen gadol makes an essential mistake, he teaches himself he makes a wrong ruling. He allows himself to do what's basically a sin, and he realizes his sin. He has to offer a special sin offering, different, or as we pointed out, not necessarily sin offering, but a cleansing offering. He brings it himself. It's described here in the 4th chapter of Vayikra. And that blood is also sprinkled on the golden altar. V'dam par helam davar shel tzibur. Par helam davar shel tzibur is the communal equivalent of such a thing. Inappropriately for the Am Yisrael. Apparently, they also say it's not just one tzibur of Am Yisrael, every tribe. So it ends up being 12 of these. Hold on a second. We have an unstable connection. Okay. If you can still hear us, please just give us a thumbs up. Param David Shel Tzibur is a bull offered on behalf of a tzibur, or say a kahal or an ida, which is an entire tribe. And that's also performed specifically by the Kohen HaMashiach himself, the high priest. And that blood is also sprinkled. And as I said, Gam Nitniyam is Bach Torah, and that's done by the Kohen Gadol. And then there's a third sacrifice, which is similar to Bar Hayim Davar of the Tzibur. And it's described at the end of Parashat Shalach. It's right in the middle of the book of Bamidbar. Could be wrong about the parasha. And it says there, that's the Sirei Avodah Zarah. Parei v'Sirei Avodah Zarah. There's a bull and goat that are offered if instead of the Sanhedrin permitting, let's say, a normal prohibition that the punishment for it would be kareth, if a person did intentionally, instead it's the actual sin of idolatry. When they come to that realization, it says they're supposed to offer this special sacrifice. And these, according to the way the halacha is brought in the Rambam, based on Chazal, the service for these bulls and these goats are similar to the ones mentioned in Vayikra, in that the service has to be performed by the Kohen Gadol himself, and that blood is also brought directly into the Kodesh and sprinkled on the golden altar, even though it's actually not explicit. Nowhere in the book of Bamidbar is this service described. The service is described only in Vayikra for what happens when the Kohen Gadol makes his own personal mistake, or when the Sanhedrin makes this mistaken ruling for Am Yisrael regarding other prohibitions. The Par and the Sa'ir Avodah Zarah is not explicit, but they connect the two because there's this concept of Seirim Hanisrafim, that is, sin offerings, goat sin offerings that are not eaten by the priests. They're actually just their extra meat is taken out and burned beyond the temple in special places that they had outside of the walls of Jerusalem where they burn these things. And the rule is whenever you have such an offering that is burned and not eaten, even though it's not an elevation offering, it's not an olah, the hechsher or it's the connection tells you that they're supposed to be sprinkled inside. So that would be the connection. Last week we also saw this thing about the kior. That was very important. If there are any questions now, we'll take them. I wanted to also bring the Talmudic source for something that we saw earlier about how Maimonides was talking about that there was the Kohanim were not answered by the Urim v'Tumim. Now, there's some who take a non-Maimonidean approach. No, they're not Maimonides, of course. What exactly is the Urim v'Tumim? According to the Rambam, the Urim v'Tumim are basically the precious stones of the Kohen Gadol's breastplate, and that's all it was, exactly as described. According to others, there was something more to Urim v'Tumim within the breastplate that was actually missing from the vestments, but they made the outer, at least like the external vestments, in order that the Kohen Gadol not be missing any of them, because the Kohen Gadol has to be fully dressed. We're going to see also more about the tzitz, God willing. What does it mean that the Kohen Gadol has to wear tzitz, or does the tzitz still exist? There's a machlokes, even in the Gemara times, what that helps. Basically, sacrifice cannot be offered in a state of impurity, if it is allowed, unless the tzitz is at least on the Kohen Gadol's head or in existence. We're going to see that. So that's a trailer for something we're going to see later. This is from Masechet Yoma on the 21st page. It says, V'amar Rav Shmuel bar Inya, Maidichtiv. Oh, who put in this perush over here? I think this is Machon Mamri also. The Ertzebo v'ikaved. It's written with the Dalet. V'karinan v'ikaveda. This happens a few times. Ikaved is normal, is standard Hebrew. Ikaveda is the way you're supposed to read it. Now, ikaveda is a form found, for example, in the book of Shemot, quite a few places. This is what Rav Shechter has called flowery language, poetic language, or lashon me'orach. It's extended, the extra hay, like hava nagila. And the word is nagil, but often for poetic purposes, in Sefer Tehillim, we have quite a few in the chapters known as Hallel, a few of these extra hays added to words, which make it more poetic language. And in this case, the traditions that we read this word as ikaveda, as though it's extended, but it's actually just written in standard Hebrew, ikaved, and that's the way we would say it if we were speaking modern Hebrew. So there's an extra hay there. What does it refer to? Ma'ishtad mechuser hay. What's up with this missing hay? And the answer is Elu chamishadvrim shayu bein mikdash rishon lemikdash sheni ve'eluvein. These are the 5 differences between the first temple and the second temple. They were Aron v'Kaphorith u'Kruvim, the ark and the Kaphorith and the Kruvim. That is, in the first temple, the ark with its Kaphorith and Kruvim were there, and they were absent as one unit in the second temple. The Kruvim that they made for the second temple weren't exactly the same as Gemara will continue to say, but that they weren't attached to the Ark of the Covenant necessarily, and that's not where God would so-called meet with Moses, which means that's not where the Nevi'im heard the voice coming from. The Kruvim were there, but they were just different ones. The Eish, the fire on the altar, that means it wasn't the same fire that came down from heaven. And the Shekhinah, which also is kind of vague, exactly. The divine presence, Rambam we saw earlier said that the Shekhinah is always there, and he's going to say it again, that the sanctity of the temple, he rules on this, the sanctity of the temple is forever because the Shekhinah is forever. It is never betelah, and it's always been there. So what does it mean that there was no Shekhinah in the second temple? Also, the Gemara continues, the fire, but didn't fire come down also on the second temple's altar and consume the sacrifices? Yeah, it wasn't the same fire. They say the fire in the first temple was fire like a lion, and in the second temple was more like a wolf. Ruach HaKodesh, and divine inspiration. This is also led, we mentioned how the Christians went off the derech last week. This is another one. Ruach HaKodesh is something that it means, like I said, it's a divine inspiration, like the Rambam describes. and they sort of made this part of God almost. They have a tripartite God, which is kind of weird because if God is supposed to be one, how is he supposed to be three? I haven't seen a good answer. That's why we're not Christian, by the way. So they have basically the God plus his son, which also doesn't make sense because if he's supposed to be a human Messiah, why is he half God? And the Holy Spirit. And this could be technically translated as Holy Spirit, but when they say that, they mean uh, something that is of God and that speaks to the prophets. But we say this, no, this is nothing. This is not God. This is just an attitude, a mindset that inspired individuals have that allows them to receive divine communication. But either way, this was absent. And this is apparently the reason why, for most of the Second Temple period, no new prophets arose among the Jewish people. Although there were prophets at the beginning of the Second Temple period, and there were also false prophets. That is, because there were prophets and people were expecting prophets, it was possible for charlatans to exist. False prophets are still mentioned in the book of Nehemiah, for example, even after they had discovered that the Kohanim Gedolim are unfit for receiving divine communication through the Urim V'Tumim. They still had false prophets. Why? Because it was still something entertainable that there would be prophets. So of course there'll be people trying to copy them and fake the people out. But once the real prophets just stopped showing up, it was a completely natural, by the way, as Rabbi Miller has pointed out. It also became unreasonable for people to try to fake it. The charlatans also disappeared, and the Jewish people haven't fallen for a real false prophet, thank God, for a long time. We could smell them, and that's why, for example, the majority of the Jewish people didn't care one bit for the Nazarene and his followers. Hold on, this is getting in the way. We'll just make that disappear. Okay, and the Urim Tumim. The Urim Tumim were missing. And once again, this is why Rambam has to say this. The Ravad was wondering, oh, there's Urim Tumim. What does it mean? They had a dispute how to understand this basic thing. So what Rambam means is like the Urim Tumim just didn't work. Whatever they had were not working right. Just like when we say fire. There was a fire in the Second Temple, but it wasn't the fire. There were Kruvim in the Second Temple. It wasn't the Kruvim. So too, there were Urim V'Tumim, but not the original ones that worked the same way. So that's when the Gemara says that they were missing. Rambam says all these things you could physically see them in the Second Temple, except for the actual Aron, but they did not work the same way. So the Shekhinah was there in the Second Temple, it just wasn't perceptible in the right way to people, and they all go hand in hand. All these things go. Basically, it's a level of human perception. That's how Rambam would understand it. People were on a lower level, so they weren't perceiving it. And what was basically lacking in the Second Temple was people going the extra mile. And we've connected that in the past to the fact that most of the Jewish people stayed in Chutz La'aretz during the Second Temple times. They had an opportunity to come back and achieve what their destiny, but they did not do so. And that was basically holding them back. But all these things could have very much been had, let's say, the majority of the Jewish people been there, and they had, we calculated before, a good almost 8 centuries to try to capitalize on the opportunity that the Second Commonwealth gave them, but they did not. I don't mean to fault them. I don't think that we're any better. Certainly, at least they were in a much more fortunate situation than we were. They had the temple at least. We haven't even tried. So that's only to our detriment. The next sections I found online, thank God, recently. This is basically the text of the Rambam in bold, and the rest is Perush interspersed with it. It's on Chabad.org's website. And the good thing is they've incorporated the Korean edition's illustrations into their description here. That's very good because before I was picking up my edition to show you, but now they've actually put it on the screen. So this is very welcome. In the English version of this, which is also available on Chabad.org, which I really, I'm really appreciative of them. I think that they've done a wonderful job to help Am Yisrael. That's a very good thing. They've put in these wonderful illustrations based on the Kitvei Yad, and you could go see them yourself. So we're not going to go into details of this because it's beyond the scope. So we're just going to go look at some of the pictures so we can understand this. The first thing that we're looking at over here is the main overlay of the temple, like a slice to understand what would the height of the temple was took up. So there's 6 amas of otem. That's basically a base or a basement, a foundation. It was similar to the way we pour concrete to build a foundation. So this was not hollow. This was filled with, let's say, stone and concrete, or the ancient version thereof, and it took up 6 amas. And for a total, once again, for every amma, you calculate basically 1.5 feet. So it's about 9 feet up. And then until you get to the floor of the Heichal, the actual Kodesh, which is another 40 amas. This basically, to get up here, there were stairs. So the stairs don't show up in this picture, and obviously the temple was much wider. We're just trying to understand here what the illustration means. Then there's 40 amoth, which would be the equivalent of about 60 feet from the floor of the temple until the ceiling. And then there was kiur, an amma of kiur, which is basically fancy engravings and the like. Here they had Beit Dilfa, or Dalfa, which is Hebrew for Aramaic for what's called delif, that's runoff. Apparently, there was water descended on the roof, and there was a way for the water to run out down into this chamber. There's another Beit Dalfa on the second story, and that was where the water gathered, and then it would be channeled out to the outside. I don't know the exact dynamics of how that would work, but the ones who built this basically did it like that. Then there's actual ceiling, and then there's Ma'aziva, which is a different part of the ceiling. You learn Masechet Sukkah. You said there's the exposed part of the ceiling that a person sees, and the Ma'aziva is the over roof, so that something can be held up on top of the ceiling. So they're basically floorboards. That's what the Ma'aziva is, the floorboards. And then there was a second chamber, basically just as the second floor, which had a ceiling height, a big open chamber, almost like that of the Heichal, just exactly 40 amot, which once again would be about 60 feet up. And there was basically nothing in this room. This was access to the Heichal itself. As Maimonides is going to mention, that's how they got into the Kodesh and Kodashim. It's improper just to walk in through the Parocheth if one is not the Kohen Gadol, so one was lowered in through a trap door, which basically went through all these layers. There was an elevator that was lowered by rope from this area. And it doesn't say anything about if this was decorated or not. And once again, there was prettied up ceiling and this Beit Dalfa and the Tikra and Mazeva. And then there was the roof and the Ma'akez, basically there was a way to walk around the roof. And there's a Kalei Orev. Kalei Orev is basically spikes to make sure that birds would not hang out on top of the temple's edifice. This is the Malta Ra'ot. In the second temple, they decorated the Shar Ha'ulam. Shar Ha'ulam is an outer room. In the Mishkan, there was the Kodesh, and that was it. That was a person walked in. In the Mikdash, there was an Ulam, a room even before the Kodesh. And that room did not have an outer door. We're going to see over here, this is the Ulam. If a person was walking from the temple over here on the east, this is a bird's eye view of the first floor, he would automatically get into the room, this Ulam, and there was a table here and a table there. This area had no gate and no cover, no curtain whatsoever. There was only doors over here that they opened every day, the doors to the actual Kodesh. So a person looking into the temple would see that this first room, which was 11 amoth wide, that is, the 11 times 1.5 comes out to almost 16 feet, or even a little bit more. You could see into this room, which is 16 feet across. There was only doors over here. And there was something called a pish over here, which is a side door, or almost a service door. A Kohen would walk in over here, and in the morning, walk through this door, and then access the Kodesh through this opening. This is the Rambam's view, by the way. The Rambam says there's all these different walls and spaces between the walls where Kohanim could walk, basically filling out what we said before was a square from all sides temple edifice. See, it looks square over here. It's deep, and there's all these open spaces over here. You'd walk into Ulam, basically. This is open. This is wall, but this is open space where someone could walk, and it goes all the way clear through. And there's all these open spaces. That's kind of weird. It would also make the place quite drafty. Either way, a person would walk in over here and through these open spaces, and then, not a person, just the Kohen who has privileged to do this, and he would open up the gates, these gates over here that lead into the Kodesh every morning. That was part of the service. And on top of this opening to the Ulam, there was these Malta Ra'ot, piece of wood, basically decorative, each one longer than the other. This was 20 amos across, and each one juts out on the right and the left, which is to the right is north and to the left is south. And the person seeing this sees these wooden beams. There was also something in between them, and it has a certain look. It invokes, let's say, like the capital of a pillar, like they used to do in the olden days. The first temple, there was also decorative bronze pillars to the right and left of the Shar Ha'olam, the classical Yachin and Boaz, but which were not replaced in the second temple. That was only a feature of Solomon's temple. And of course, this Maimonidean view of the temple, the Kodesh and the Kodesh Kodeshim. We're going to zoom out for the benefit of those watching. Notice there how many different spaces there are. This is an open space beyond the walls of the actual Kodesh, and another open space and another open space. So you have wall, open space, wall, open space, wall, open space, wall, Kodesh, and that fills it out. But the more classical understanding, let's say, of the rest of Rishonim, looks much more simple. It's this. And you just have wall and an open space over here that's not necessarily accessed. And then you have these open spaces, which are divided, and they go around the Kodesh, and then another open space. And that's it. And also the Ulam juts out in front. The Ulam is basically the full length of what Rambam says the temple was from north to south, but the rest of the structure was significantly less. And that is basically how you see the temple in most models. And last week we saw pictures where the Maimonidean temple basically looked like a cube, whereas the other Rishonim have it not looking like that. And here's the Pishpesh again. According to a verse in Yechezkel, who he was the Navi who was given a vision of how the temple should look in the future. This other Pishpesh, which is opposite this one, which was accessed by the Kohen on every day in order to get into the Kodesh, in order to open the doors from within, this one was shut and was never to be entered. It says that God himself uses this door, so to speak, whatever that means. I don't know what that means, but even it had to be closed out of respect, and it was not used by mortal men. And it's also represented in this model over here. And we're going to get into the Roved next week, exactly how the walls were built. You can see that there's a triple machloketh here, how it is supposed to be built, what it means. There were things jutting out of the walls, basically, and for what purpose. We're going to see that also. And I think that would bring it. If there's no more questions, that'll bring us to this week. And we have a question? No? Can't hear you.
No, I don't have a question.
Okay, good. So that'll bring us to, God willing, next week when we're getting to the nitty-gritty of this chapter. And don't forget to send in your questions and comments, and like, share, and subscribe. And God willing, this week we should see progress in the construction of the temple. Have a good one.
We would like to encourage our viewers to share these videos with friends and send in your responses. We would also like to suggest the following opportunity to our viewers. If you identify with Rabbi Bar-Hayim's message and would like to sponsor or dedicate a video interview with the rabbi in honor or memory of a loved one, if you would like to obtain Birkon Nusach Eretz Yisrael or invite the rabbi for a speaking engagement, please email us at office@machonshilo.org. If you are inspired by Rabbi Bar-Hayim's message and would like to get involved in Torah Eretz Yisrael activities in your local area, please fill out the relevant form by going to the link which appears on the screen.